I'd like to say good afternoon to everyone who's joining us. And this is the Yorkville University panel discussion on climate change and energy management. And I'll be one of your facilitators today. My name is Jill Cummings. But first, we'd like to take a moment to reflect on our land acknowledgement. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that Yorkville University and Toronto Film School campuses are situated in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous nations. And we reaffirm our responsibility to increase awareness and understanding of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples and colonial legacy. We commit to strengthening our relationship with Indigenous peoples throughout Canada. And without further ado, I'd like to say today we're privileged to have with us our president of Yorkville University, Dr. Julia Christensen Hughes, who will introduce this panel discussion. Dr. Hughes is a well-known academic leader who's committed to global sustainability and education about climate change and energy management. It's my great pleasure to introduce our president, Dr. Julia Christensen Hughes, to introduce our panel and our discussion in which we hope all of you will participate.
Thank you very much, Jill, and greetings to all of the panelists and for the attendees. Thank you so much for joining us today for this really important discussion. Some of you may know that as part of my own research and various academic leadership roles that I've held, I've been very engaged with a number of international organizations, such as the Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative, or under the auspices of the United Nations, the Global Compact, and the Organization of Business Schools, known as Committing to the Principles for Responsible Management Education. At the core of all of this work are concepts of ethical leadership, corporate social responsibility, the ideas business as a force for good. Currently, I serve on something known as the HESI Roundtable, and that's the United Nations Higher Education Sustainability Initiative. And some of the work we are doing there is challenging the metrics used in traditional university and business school rankings and ratings, and questioning to what extent those metrics are aligned with the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or as it's known, its 2030 agenda. For the students who have joined and maybe haven't spent that much time looking at the 17 SDGs, I'll put a link in the chat in a bit. But the SDGs provide a roadmap for all sectors of society for creating a more equitable and sustainable future. They deal with issues of inequality and poverty and climate and water and education. So as one example on the education front, there is an amazing report written by CMEC, that's the Council of Ministers of Education Canada, and it lays out in really clear prose their commitment to ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education in Canada. That's SDG number 4. Many of the goals, as I suggested, have to do with climate change, directly or indirectly. Goal number 7 talks about affordable and clean energy, with its aspiration of ensuring access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable and modern energy for all. Goal number 11 talks about sustainable cities and communities, with its objective of making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So given my personal work, my personal commitment to help advance the SDGs through education, I couldn't have been more delighted to learn that Yorkville University, under the leadership of Peter and Jill, who are on the panel today, was planning on hosting an event on climate change and energy management. So joining us today is a panel of esteemed faculty, researchers, and policy advocates, each reflecting on the implications of the findings of the recent International Panel on Climate Change report. I also understand there will be provocative calls for action for all of us, for each of us in our own roles, is how we can contribute to a more sustainable future for our communities, for our children, our children's children, and theirs. So it is now my pleasure to introduce you to YU faculty member and climate change Peter Love, who I understand will be convening the panel.
Great, thank you very much, Julia, and welcome students, staff, and others to join us on this discussion. This is going to be, please keep in mind, we really want to respond to your questions. We're going to have some opening comments, but more than anything else, we really would love to be here to hear from you and any questions or comments you might have. And as Julia says, we're going to end with a call for action, and from each of us, and from hopefully all of you as well. Delighted to also say this is going to be a PowerPoint-free presentation. So those of you who are sick and tired of PowerPoint, you're probably sick and tired of Zoom as well, but I can't help that. But at least this is relatively PowerPoint-free, and so we're cutting down on our energy use there. I wanted to start off just to make the connection between climate change, energy, and greenhouse gas emissions. And I think most of you have some idea of this, and some more than others, but I wanted to make sure that we started from the same premise. So as most of you know, I'm sure the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued their recent report in 2021. The summary for policymakers is quite readable, 40 pages, so it's not a huge book. There are 4,000 pages behind it, and that's a little bit more tougher going, but it is a relatively readable document. And one of the key pieces from this, their first recommendation, their first finding A1, and I'll just read it out verbatim. It is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, xyrosphere, and biosphere have occurred. So every time they do one of these reports, they're more and more confident that the climate is changing, not necessarily just warming, it's changing with water, storms, droughts, cyclones. The weather is changing. So the word is, really the better word is climate change, which is the name of their report. Some people refer to it as climate weirding. We're getting really weird weather. So we know that the climate is changing, and what the IPCC report is telling us is that it's primarily caused by the combustion of fossil fuels, by mankind releasing carbon dioxide and methane into the environment that is creating the gases that are leading to climate change. So we know that in Canada, 81% of our anthropogenic, human-made greenhouse gas emissions are from the production and use of energy. And if there's one number I hope you remember from this this hour, I hope you keep that in mind, 81%. So yes, these carbon dioxide and methane and other trace gases can come from other things, agriculture and some industrial processes, but 81% is from the production and use of energy. So that means if we really want to tackle this problem, and we need to tackle this problem, we need to focus on energy. That's the elephant in the room, and we know it's there, and we've got a pretty good idea of what it is. The other interesting number that I think shocks a lot of people is that when they hear is that we currently lose about 60% of our energy in conversion in Canada. The internal combustion engine that people drive, it's less than 20% efficient. 80% of the energy that's burned in the gasoline in a car goes to waste heat and emissions and tires and roads and a whole bunch of things. So our whole entire energy system is really inefficient. So that tells me there's a huge role for energy management in how we grapple with this. So that's why this panel is really going to be focusing on energy management. It's why Yorkville University has a number of university courses that deal with energy management, and you're going to be hearing about some of those from the guests we have. And I think the final thing I want to say is that I think it's really important for us all to try to focus on solutions. It's very easy to be very negative, and a number of leading environmentalists have tended to be negative, and they talk about how bad it is because they're really very scared. Telling people how scared you are without having a solution is not effective. It turns people off. If you can even get their interest at all. Typically, they're not interested. And I think the best example of that that comes to my mind, and many people have referred to this before, is Martin Luther King, who in 1963 in the US, as a person of color, could have complained a great deal about the unfairness of the system he was brought up in and the unfairness of the system that he was currently living in. He could have talked about his nightmare, and he had a nightmare. It was a terrible place for a person of color to live in the United States in 1963. He did not talk about his nightmare. He talked about his dream, and he knew that he may not be able to see and realize his dream himself, but he knew to mobilize people, he needed a positive message. So that's what that's why we're focusing on solutions today. That's why the purpose of this panel is to explore, okay, we have a problem, Houston, what do we do about it? And we've got some really great experts here that are going to be able to help us explore that, talk a little bit about the IPCC report, talk about the work that they're doing. And especially for the students, I'm hoping that you'll hear from them different careers in the energy management business that you may want to consider. This is a growing business. This is a labor-intensive business, energy management. You're going to be hearing from 4 experts who have different roles in this system, and one of these roles sparks something with you. And as I said, we'll be ending with some calls for action. What is it we can do? You will have participated in this panel. That's a check mark, but I think there's more that you all can do. And I know there's a lot that you are already doing. So with that, we're going to have the panelists each give us a 2 or 3 minute overview of the issues that they see. I'll introduce them individually. And then what I'm going to be doing is we're going to be responding to your questions. So as you're listening to the panelists, I encourage you to please come up with your questions, and we'll respond to them from there. So the first speaker is going to be Emmit Coley, and Emmit is the professor here at Yorkville University, based in BC. Got his PhD from India and a postdoctorate in research from the University of Arizona. Bestowed the Best Teacher Award and Young Scientist Award. He teaches energy systems operations at Yorkville University. The topic of his dissertation was reducing operating costs in an engineering industry through an energy audit, a case study conducted at a forging unit located in the northern Indian state of Punjab to show the effectiveness of energy audit. Dr. Coley has published research about analysis of carbon credit trading practices and other in the Journal of Energy Management. So he's a well-known world expert in this, and with a focus on energy management. So Emmit, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Let me first discuss about IPCC report, as you said, and then I will discuss about my research. First, some statistical facts. The average, you know that the average mobile creates 55 kilograms of carbon emission in manufacturing. This is equal to 26 weeks of laundry. Apple company released approximately 22.6 million metric ton of carbon dioxide in 2020. It takes 1.5 million barrels of oil to manufacture water bottles every year. So can you imagine? So let me discuss about IPCC report. IPCC report is reflecting that human-induced climate change is affecting climate extreme in every region across the globe. Evidence of observed change in extreme weather, increased danger of wildfires, loss of biodiversity, ice sheet collapse, increasing global sea level, abrupt ocean circulation, ocean acidification. So as Sir was discussing about droughts, floods, which we are going to face in coming future. So it's the human which is responsible. It's we who are responsible for all these things. And we are the one who burns fossil fuel. We are the one who produce livestock such as meat, wool, leather, or labor from domestic animals. We are responsible for clearing trees, increasing the amount of heat trapping gases in the atmosphere. It is we. Talking about my research, before that, I will quote one line given by former US president. He said, "We are the first generation to feel the effect of climate change and the last generation who can do something about it." We have to do something about it. Regarding my research topic was analysis of carbon credit trading practices, a study of manufacturing organization in British Columbia, Canada. This paper was written with Dr. Ajay and Dr. Jill. It has been recently published in an international journal of energy sector management. And I'm going to put in the chat box the link for this. Okay, the link is provided in the chat box. So let me discuss about my research a little bit, and then if you have any question, let me know. Before discussing my research about carbon credit trading, let me tell you about what is carbon credit and then about my research. A carbon credit is a permit that allows the company to hold it to emit a certain amount of carbon dioxide. One carbon credit permits emission of a mass of equal to 1 ton of carbon dioxide. So companies that pollute needs credit. Meanwhile, the companies may sell any unneeded credit. So credits are traded in a unit of 1 ton of carbon dioxide. And it is estimated that credit worth of 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide will be needed to get to 2020 target as per the Paris Agreement. So what I have done in my research, I circulated questionnaire through face-to-face interaction with organizations which were involved in engineering, technology, mining, power generation, and manufacturing across BC, Canada. The major factors which we found that influence industries were avoiding carbon taxes, international expansions, venture capitals, competitive advantage, and clean technology.
Emmit, could you wrap up in a minute or two? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So many organizations are interested in carbon credit, but they are not aware of carbon credit. So this is our duty as a researcher, our duty as a human being to make aware to all the industries about carbon credit, about the use of carbon credit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm sure there'll be some questions. And we're trying to, sorry to come in, we're trying to keep these initial comments as brief because we do want to get some questions in here. So the next panelist is Rita Owusu, and she teaches with me a course on energy policy at Yorkville. She's professor. She achieved her first and second degrees in petroleum engineering and her PhD in energy management from the University of Abadan in Nigeria. Holds a Master's of Business Administration from the University of South Wales, UK. Certified energy manager and a member of the Association of Energy Engineers in the US. Very active as well with the BC Sustainable Energy Association and the United Nations Volunteer Organization on energy-related issue. Rita's been an academic for over 7 years and has published various energy policy-related papers. Her research interests are energy management, energy economics, and climate and energy policy. So, Rita.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for that introduction. And it's nice to have our participants here. But I would like to start by asking us a question that has been on my mind, after reading the IPCC report. And the question is, what type of future do we want for our children and our grandchildren? While you're thinking of an answer to that question, let me put us through on what the climate system is and the possible causes of climate change to ascertain what the IPCC report has stated. Now, according to the IPCC, our climate system consists of the atmosphere, land surface, snow, ice, and other bodies of water and living things. Now, the climate system, evolves on its own by its internal dynamics and some external factors. These factors include solar variation, volcanic eruptions, and human-induced changes to the atmosphere's composition. The recent IPCC report has clearly shown that since about the 18th century, the changes in our climate system have been human-induced. The climate change is affecting every region in the world, like my colleague said, every region in the world in different ways. And so that means there is no hiding place. We have to do something about this issue. There's no hiding place for anyone because we are likely going to experience severe extreme weather leading to sea level rise, flooding, droughts. We can go on and on about this different consequences. Yesterday, it was quite windy. I'm aware it was as a result of what they call the bomb cyclone. These are some of the consequences. Imagine this is what we have to face on a daily basis or weekly basis or monthly basis in our daily lives. Flights were canceled yesterday, ferries, things came to a halt because of that incident. So the climate change is modifying our water cycle, and this will also significantly impact the ecosystem, significantly impact our access to food. One interesting fact pointed out in the report is that the type of future we get depends on the choices we make today. Choices that I will talk about as the discussion progresses, but we need to ask ourselves, what choice are we going to make? Because that will go a long way on the type of future that we will have and the type of future that our kids and grandkids will have as well.
Thank you very much, Rita. Great comments and great call and great perspective from a mother. So I appreciate that very much. Our third speaker is Andrew Salmon. I've known Andrew for many years. He's been a good friend of mine, and I followed his career very closely. He's just taken a new position. This would not be something that students graduating from Yorkville will get in their first year, but maybe after you've been working for a while, you'd be lucky, be fortunate enough. He's a full-time commissioner at the BC Utilities Commission, which is the organization that regulates BC Hydro and Fortis BC. He's an adjunct professor at the Department of Chemical Engineering at the University of Victoria. But he started his academic teaching right here at Yorkville, and he actually taught the Energy Management Certificate at Yorkville University from 2017 to 19. Worked as a professional engineer on topics of energy policy and economics, resilient communities, super efficient building construction, deep energy retrofits, renewable energy resources, and a co-founder of the Canadian Academy of Engineering Initiatives. I'll also say some of you may know about the STEP code in Vancouver. It's one of the most progressive in North America, and I consider Andrew as being largely responsible for the leadership of Vancouver and BC in a STEP code. So Andrew, over to you.
Oh, thanks, Peter. Yeah, welcome everybody. And I'm joining you from Victoria, the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking Indigenous peoples on whose traditional territory the UVic operates. I'm going to talk about buildings. Buildings is a place, virtually every Canadian lives in a building, works in a building, and buildings interact with this issue probably most prominently of all the sectors of the economy. And I'm going to make a case that climate adaptation become the gateway to mitigation. And I'll be speaking about that a little bit in my closing remarks. You know, climate change is affecting all of us in multiple ways in British Columbia and across Canada, in the buildings that we live in and work in and play in. This summer, of course, the village of Lytton set a record high Canadian temperature of nearly 50 degrees Celsius. And interestingly, in Southwest British Columbia, Lytton's probably an exception. We don't have air conditioning in a lot of our buildings, but you can be assured that after that extreme heat event, the vast majority of new construction in British Columbia will include air conditioning. Similarly, wildfire interface, which unfortunately destroyed the village of Lytton. And most recently, and Rita mentioned it, the Pineapple Express that has hit our Southwest coast, like every winter, wind-driven rain. So adaptation to these extreme weather events is a great starting point because it's here and now, it's acute. And the idea is that when the public engages in business transactions that allow for adaptation and resilience, that's going to open the door for the mitigation measures that are so critical. And I put a link in the chat to BC government's brand new, hot off the press yesterday, continent leading, probably world leading climate mitigation strategy. And I just want to point out to students the key distinction between new buildings and existing buildings. So new buildings, when constructed, and they represent about 3% of the building stock in any particular year, they trigger the BC Building Code, Canadian Electrical Code, and others. And so they are standardized at the highest level possible on the globe. In fact, they're capable of withstanding earthquakes to the scale of the one that we had in the year 1700 here in Southwest British Columbia. But that's only 3% of the building stock. What about the other 97%? And the fact that 70 or 80% of buildings that exist today, the existing buildings, will be with us in the year 2030. And this is the key opportunity for business students, is to encourage owners and occupants of existing buildings to invest in renewal. And so the BC government strategy has come up with a number of, or the roadmap has come up with a number of strategies to do that. One of which is PACE financing, property assessed clean energy financing, so that the financing can outlive the ownership cycle of the building owner who will invest in heat pump upgrades and building envelope upgrades to make their building more efficient and more resilient to the climate change impacts. High efficiency equipment, the highest efficiency equipment should be installed. And that happens to be heat pumps. So heat pumps on the electric side are 200 to 300% efficient for their use of electricity and converting that to space heating. We have a brand new technology called gas heat pumps being developed around the world, which will allow us to use renewable natural gas and hydrogen to both heat and cool our buildings. So I'm going to stop there and pass it over to the next panelist. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Andrew. All right, great. And we've got a question now. We'll come to in a minute. Again, just a reminder, please post your questions on the Q&A, and we will be getting those. We've got our fourth panelist is going to be speaking, Ali El-Nagar. And Ali is a professional engineer in energy management and currently working as a corporate energy manager at a local municipality. He's worked in various energy management sectors and projects in BC, Alberta, and Ontario. He has a background in electrical engineering. He holds a master's in clean energy engineering from the University of British Columbia. He is a certified energy manager and project management professional. Is passionate about learning, teaching, and sharing his experience. In his downtime, he enjoys reading in the outdoors and teaches energy policy, legislation, and his social environment, which Rita and I also do at Yorkville University. And I think it's just as we've had Rita and Emmit talk more of an academic and in terms of the research they do. Andrew gave us a perspective from the province. Ali's right at the city, and it's where a lot of things really happen, and there's some great leadership being taken by cities. So Ali, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Just one caveat. I was basically the energy manager at the Township of Langley, shifted positions recently, still within facilities and sustainability, but I'm working more on planning and implementation, so seeing some of the projects through. Thank you very much for holding this, and I'm very glad to be part of it. A few points about the report. I have, Peter, you mentioned something very important, which I think is, we'll be talking about, when we talk about climate change, it's easy to get negative very quickly. And this is very important to try to avoid. The point is to try to know the facts for what they are. And the reason for that is that we need to take the appropriate action to hopefully get to a happy ending eventually. One of the main things that have to be noted is obviously the urgency related to this whole thing, right? The urgency of action. In 2019, it was a year when a lot of municipalities declared climate emergency. And from then on, there's a lot of work on trying to develop these action plans. Just one thing about basically how exponentially, how climate change is developing exponentially is one statistic: half of all the emissions in history was emitted in the last 30 years. So just, I know we're throwing a lot of numbers these years, but this discussion, but some of these statistics can, one can reflect on a little bit. So it just shows about how fast and how our growth and development across the world has been growing exponentially. And another point, just to build on Emmit's point about us being the first generation to feel the impact and the last to do something about it. It's easy to think of climate change as a future thing. And one thing to remember is that we've already seen 1 degree of warming relative to the end of the, right now, relative to the end of the 1800s, the late 1800s. And what this means is we're living through a climate right now that no human has lived through before, ever, right? So we're already seeing the impacts of that. That's one statistic from the report itself. It says extreme weather events that were common once every 50 years are already happening 5 times as frequently right now, right? And if we get to 2 degrees warming by the end of the century, that would be 14 times. So it's all these extreme weather events that we're seeing these years. I mean, these days, I guess. The main thing I want to highlight here, I guess the point from the report is that how important the next decade is, all the way from now until 2030. You hear a lot about, targets, organizations and municipalities having targets to 2050, achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. It doesn't mean that we can push action until the last years before 2050. The next 10 years until 2030 will dictate how this whole thing develops, because there's there's something called cascading. There's something that whatever we do now will feel the impacts of for decades to come. So This is why urgency of this matter is very important. So from a municipal perspective, and I won't try not to take too long, we have emissions from transportation, from buildings, definitely as the main sources. But yeah, and what I've seen, the last point I'll make is over the last couple of years, there's been a shift from having or implementing energy management plans or focusing on reducing energy to focusing on emissions. So instead of having a strategic energy management plan that we're implementing across a corporate level, now we have a climate action strategy that touches both on the corporate facilities and infrastructure and transportation, as well as on the community level. So this shift is very important, and the role of energy management is also extremely important in that, in terms of looking at the demand side and how and not just focusing on emissions and fuel switching, which we can drill into with during the Q&A. Over to you, Peter. All
right, thank you very much, Ali. All right, we've got 2 questions that have already come in, and again, I encourage you to ask a question. This is your chance. You got 4 experts here who are very interested in hearing from you, and the first 2 questions are really good, show some really interesting insights. So I'm just going to read this one out. Very timely panel, thank you. Here's my comment and question. The enormous ecological costs of big data use and storage are one of the most important issues in today's big data society. With this in mind, what can we do to address the concerns about digital transformation and sustainability in the post-pandemic era? Who'd like to take a shot at that one? What can we do about big data and electricity use? I see some nodding heads.
I'll just do a really quick one, given that I put the Clean BC plan up. But BC has committed to 100% emissions-free electricity, and we've traditionally been about 95% emissions-free with a few natural gas plants. So the answer to your question, Sagdas, is move the data centers to British Columbia. And in fact, so we're competing with low-cost electricity in places in the Midwest, like Wyoming, places like that where it is coal-fired. Keep in mind that the information technology associated with big data is a tool for decarbonization. So we need the IT. The key is obviously for those companies to set their own corporate emissions targets and essentially put a shadow price of carbon within their investment decisions. And in British Columbia, as of yesterday, in Canada, as of the Supreme Court case from 6 months ago, we have a price of carbon of $170 per metric ton. So in 2030, so when those decisions get made as to where you locate, put that shadow price of carbon into the calculations today, because those will be the future conditions. And that will give jurisdictions like British Columbia, Manitoba, Quebec, Newfoundland, and Labrador the competitive advantage to host these data centers. Thanks.
Great answer. Are you sure you're with the BC Utility Commission and not with the Tourism BC or Business BC? Anyway, very good answer. Thank you, Andrew. Very wise. Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, just a quick point on that. One thing we're talking about energy management and decarbonization. We're always trying to look at a holistic approach and have systems work together. With data centers, you get a lot of heat coming out of these data centers. So one of the recommended approaches when you're trying to decarbonize buildings, I guess, is always to try to see where do I have heat sources that I can reuse and recover and reuse somewhere else in the building. So another point during the design, I guess, of this, other than moving to BC, is to maybe have a plan or have a design that makes sure that this heat that comes out of these humongous, data centers is reused in the building and offsets some of the gas use that would otherwise be needed for heating.
it could be used heating in another adjacent building. Okay, we got 5 other questions, so let's move on to the next one. So the next one, this is I don't know whether Julia is still on the line or not, but she'll like this one. To increase awareness regarding climate change, would it be possible to design our course assignments for any course to incorporate clean energy and climate change concepts? My understanding that this can be done even in math courses. Raj, thank you very much. Julie, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question. So thank you for asking. And I just have to say I've been enjoying listening to the panel, but here's a question for me. Okay, so I'm a big fan of educational institutions aligning what I call signature learning outcomes with the Sustainable Development Goals and understanding them broadly, right? So it can be questions or exploration of how do we create a more, a more inclusive society. It can look at poverty. It can look at how do we foster entrepreneurial skills amongst people from economically disadvantaged groups, as well as dealing with climate change and sustainable energy management. So I look at the SDGs broadly and say, what can we do to educate all of our students with respect to the SDGs? And more importantly, like not just the content and the awareness, but developing the skills to be effective advocates and change makers in society. Because I go back to Rita's point, right? And I share that view and that concern, like what is the future that we want for our children and children's children? And it's going to take all of us learning new skills, taking on new values, right, of collaboration and sustainability. So I'm a big fan of that and looking at how we can embed, whether it's different kinds of assignments. I love the idea of like in a math course, bringing in some calculations where people are looking at an energy management issue, for example, but across all of our programs and all of our courses, there's so much opportunity here, including within Toronto Film School, which is part of Yorkville University, where our students are creating really powerful mini documentaries and films on a number of issues of real social relevance. So I'm proud that our institution is aligned and is looking for ways to increase our impact further.
Well, Raj, I particularly like your question. As Julie knows, when she was first appointed our new president, I sent her an email of congratulations, and I decided to go further. And I said, I'm sure you're getting a lot of advice from a lot of different people, but I thought to her, this would be a good idea to have every student in some way have some knowledge about climate change and sustainability issues. And she got back to me in record time and said, absolutely. So great question. And I think you're going to be seeing something. And I think this is an opportunity for Yorkville to be a real leader in Canada in terms of its offerings. So great. Got a few more questions here. That's great. So Rima, is it feasible for all homes and companies or dwellings that require electricity to rely on solar energy? Interesting. So what
Can
do
I take that?
Yep.
Let me just take it. Yeah, I mean, that question is well, I say it depends on what your energy source is. For example, people in BC, we get our electricity from hydro, which is a clean energy source. So switching from hydro to solar doesn't really change or address your carbon footprint. Okay, but if we are if our energy source is from fossil fuels, yes, it's a good idea to adopt the solar energy. But again, as we know, these renewable energy sources like solar and wind, they have intermittent nature, and I think that has also been a drawback for these energy sources, and that's why it seems like fossil fuels keep having that urge over these energy sources. So, but again, it is time to address or review our energy system being driven by fossil fuel. So if the use of solar energy can reduce our carbon footprint, yes, that is quite good. I mean, in homes, that is quite that go. But if you are in a region like BC that already produces energy from a clean energy source, it might not really address much.
Great. Andrew, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree with Rita. And I'm going to just add that the business opportunity for solar, and this is an important technical term, is in those jurisdictions where solar generation is available with the peak load events of the customer base. And so essentially where air conditioning defines the peak load of an electric utility, which is the case in California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, solar is extremely valuable because it's maximizing its output and generation at the time of the coincident peak. And because solar is so distributed, you know, the air conditioner at the house next door, if you're sharing your electricity from solar, will benefit from the generation of solar at your house. So I think solar has its place in British Columbia. You know, just I totally agree with Rita that we don't need it from a climate perspective. However, from a peak load management perspective in the Okanagan, we also have you know, a second peak. It's not the highest peak demand of the year. It's still winter time when people are space heating. But that's really where the rationale for solar comes in, is to supply air conditioning. Thank you.
And Ali, you had a comment?
Yeah, just a quick note. You know, historically, when you had an energy, I think we covered this in our energy features and transitions course, but when you had a new energy source, you know, transitioning from biomass to coal, then to oil, and then to natural gas, it was always a new source of energy that was, you know, more available, more cost effective to extract, and more efficient, etc. But right now we're at a scale in terms of energy demand globally that we don't really have a silver bullet solution for this whole thing. It's basically all hands on deck. We need every solution we have to work together. We need to do everything efficiently. We need solar. We need you know, all the low carbon technologies for all our sectors, right? So that's why it's a big challenging thing that we have to address. And people, I mean, that's a core point, is that basically there's no silver bullet, no one solution that can do it, right? So thank you.
Okay, well, let's move on. We got some other really interesting questions. Here's a dandy here for us. Nancy asks, we have been discussing about climate action, but any action on climate change confronts serious ethical issues of fairness and responsibility across individuals, nations, generations, and the rest of nature. In other words, climate change is a perfect moral storm, as Stephen M. Gardner argues. Any views on looking at climate change as a serious moral issue? Who wants to? There you go, Emmit, good for you.
Yes, Nancy, very good question. First of all, I believe that climate change is no doubt economical, political issue, but yes, it is fundamentally a moral issue, and it calls for moral response. So it's our moral duty to translate into internal motivation to behave in a way consistent with our self-view. So it's our duty, it's our moral duty to save environment. As Rita told, what we have to answer to our kids. So we have the moral duty to perform.
Yep. Okay, anybody else want to add to that, Rita?
Yeah, I mean, climate change, like I mentioned in my opening statements, is affecting everyone, you know, in different ways in every region in the world. So it's something that requires global cooperation and for people to really believe that this is what it is. I mean, in the past, people said is a myth, it's not real. But the evidences are now before us. The heat waves, the wildfires, the cyclones, the hurricanes, we can go on and on. Is this still a myth? I mean, this is actually, playing out. And imagine we decide not to do anything. Like I asked, what question do we want for our children and grandchildren if we decide to do nothing? And especially with the scenarios, pointed out by the in the IPCC report, if we decide not to do anything, that means we are headed for an apocalyptic future. It's really going to be bad. So it requires global cooperation. We need to come together and decide to take action to address climate change. Because truthfully, like I said to someone, I said, the environment has been good to us. Our raw materials, everything that we have is from the environment. It will be unfair not to be fair to this environment. We need to be stewards to our environment, and we need to understand that we need to take action now to avert, a very catastrophic future.
Okay, we got a few more questions here. So let me just continue on.
I want to add one line to
Okay.
Peter's comment, if you allow me, Peter.
Sure.
Can I add one line? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I feel that 20 years ago, people could be excused for not knowing much or not doing much about climate change particularly. But today we have no excuse.
No. Yep. Good. Okay, Linda asked, as we all know, this is a global problem that needs cooperation at a global level. I saw a news report yesterday explaining that India relies heavily on coal for energy and their economy and won't be ready to transition to clean energy for around 9 years. How can huge scale problems like this be addressed? So what do we do with India? So anyone want to give a thought on that one?
I mean, can I say something?
Yeah.
There was an article on CBC talking about, the term climate debt. Climate debt is what basically like a commitment from developed countries to pay or help developing countries develop more, I guess, with climate change in mind, more environmentally and all that. So, and that piece specifically was about, there was a commitment that was made for $100 billion that wasn't met in Canada, and I can't remember another country put that forward. So the idea is for this to be a global issue for developed countries, that developing countries can say you took your turn and you used fossil fuels and you developed cheaply using available energy sources that is forbidden for us now because we're going to damage the environment and cause more climate change. So it's very political. It is very complicated, but it is there's some truth to that in terms of basically all countries having to work together and some assistance having to come from developed countries.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, all the countries are putting together, as BC as a province, but all the countries as well are putting together their plans to be presented at COP26 next week in Glasgow. So we'll certainly see that, and it'll be interesting to see India and China and see what their responses are. A few more questions here. This might be another one, I guess, for those of you teaching at Yorkville. Is it possible to cover the topic of climate risk management in business courses? That would be very helpful to the industry of financial services sector. Well, that's a really interesting. I don't know the other York. Do any of the courses cover that? Climate risk management?
I think so, but that should be for core energy management students.
Yeah,
So what I will suggest is that I think students should be able to take these courses, especially maybe introduction to energy management or energy policy. Students should be able to take these courses to give them an insight on energy management and ways that we can address climate change.
Yep.
I think that would be.
Yep. And what I'd say as well is that you may be able to speak. Your professor, you may be able to do that as a project, as a paper within an existing course. But we might look at that as a new course. So it's an interesting idea. Another question here. This is a bit of a long one, but it's got an interesting preamble. World War II lasted 5 years and had many further years of impact, changing lives around the world, with many people acting for the common good. COVID-19 has only impacted us for 2 years, and many societies want desperately to get back to normal without necessarily thinking of a common good. Have you seen any major research that integrates the psychology of climate change management as part of the solutions you're mentioning for resolving environmental challenges? It seems this would be an integral to long-term strategies resolving the existential barriers to long-term sustained action. This is from Paul Graham. Any thoughts from anybody on that? Because I might just start on that. And this is an area of particular interest to me personally. I'm not an engineer, but my background was in math, physics, and chemistry, and did an MBA. And just because of the course selection I had, I never took psychology. And yet, over the last few years, I've begun to realize how important in psychology, and there's a whole branch of psychology called environmental psychology, is in terms of messaging on climate and on energy. So a few years ago, when I turned 70, I went back and took first year psychology with 1,500 17-year-olds. Last year, I took a second year psychology course with 200 18-year-olds. And this January, I'm taking a fourth year environmental psychology course, hopefully with a smaller number and hopefully in person. So I think it's a fascinating area. And Paul, if you wanted to reach me, there's some really interesting work done. There's a professor at University of Victoria that's a real leader in this field. There's some really interesting textbooks that's been done. So I look my name up, and I'd love to talk to you about that, because it's a really fascinating area and one that I'm personally very interested in. Anybody else want to add to that one on psychology of climate change?
Well, I'll just make the link between behaviors, attitudes, and policy. So I'm coming to you from Ontario, and this has been experienced across the country, but I remember when people thought seat belts were a bad idea, right? And they had no intention of buckling up. And there were all kinds of campaigns to encourage people to buckle up, but it wasn't until policy changed, it wasn't till the law changed, right, that people got in the habit of it. And now probably you could remove the law and people would still be buckling up because we got that behavioral change. So it's interesting, like, where does habit come from? And I think, there's different levers to help develop healthy habits, right? And so we have to find different routes in. And, it's interesting if we were doing the same thing now with the vaccine mandates and, putting pressure on people to do the right thing. So I don't know. I think that there can be an interesting study in all kinds of things. And I'm sure this great work has been done that we could really draw some powerful lessons in support of the kinds of energy management and climate change strategies that you're advocating. But yeah, it's behavioral change, right? And that's what Al Gore knew, and that's what he was advocating for.
Right. A few more questions, and then you can begin to think about this, because we're going to take a 10 minutes, we're going to talk. The panelists are going to talk about a call to action, and then I'm going to ask each of you in the audience to write down on the screen your call for action. So get ready for that, and then we're going to put it together as a big word wall. But before, we've got a few more questions. This is a really interesting career question. Do you feel having a career in developing and selling energy is a conflict of interest when it comes to the issue of fixing climate change? Does this make you more biased to explore solutions that would affect the common masses more than your personal stability and standing? So does a job in the traditional energy industry, is that a conflict of interest when you're trying to fix climate change? That's a dandy one.
let me say something there.
Yeah, you're in the industry, so that's a good one for you, Rita.
Okay. The truth is, from the dawn fire to date, there's been transitions in our energy system. We've moved from coal to oil to natural gas to now we're talking about renewables. And there are factors that have always influenced this transitions, either economic growth, population growth. Now, the factor influencing this transition that we are going through, or it is that it's related to the environment, and it is an important factor. While it seems like yes, it's going to impact people's jobs, it's going to impact certain industries, we need to, for once, take a step back and rethink. We need to put our environment ahead of us, because the truth is, if the environment is not, okay, let me put it this way, our livelihood and our well-being depends on the well-being of the environment and the productivity of the environment. So if we keep putting ourselves first and putting our economic growth or businesses first ahead of environment, when the consequences begin to play out, there will be nowhere to do these businesses or this energy businesses that we are having. So we need to now, especially those in the oil and gas industry, we need to start, thinking of diversifying our portfolios, rethinking our strategies that will incorporate the environment. And that is when, the issue of triple bottom line comes in. We are not looking at just the profits. We are also looking at the society, looking at the environment. So it is important that when we are looking at the issue of climate change, we should not be biased about it. We should address it for what it is.
All right, we've got a few more questions, but I do want to move on to the next phase, because I do want to really, I don't want this just to be an academic discussion about policies and programs. I want to have a bit of I want to end this, and the panelists agreed that it's something we wanted to do, was to end with a call to action. So I'm going to call upon the panelists in the reverse order in which they first spoke to give us their short 1-minute call to action. Ali, go for it. What's your call to action? Oh, you're muted. Ali, you're muted. There we go.
Okay, sorry about that. Do I have one, like a minute or a few words?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
take a minute.
Just very quickly, I've had some experience working in an oil and gas company, also in energy efficiency and GHG. I've had some experience with mining and all that. Seeing projects that reduce energy and emissions in the industrial sector was very exciting. We have a project that can reduce 5,000 tons a year or whatnot. It's just like massive projects. So moving to buildings, and I working in had a shift and moved within a school district now in a municipality. The initial thought was, hey, you know what? You implement these projects, you replace some HVAC systems, you do this and that, and you reduce your emissions. Instead of 5,000 tons a year, now it's 25 tons a year. Now it's 100 tons a year. So I was like, hey, is this? It doesn't feel as impactful, I would say. But then, working through it more, reading more, it's actually it's not like I initially thought. The role of buildings. Andrew touched on buildings a lot, but 40% of global emissions come from buildings, right? If you look at I think also you have 30% come from transportation. The idea here is cities or municipalities. The contribution to emissions is over, again, another number, and sorry for throwing too many numbers, over 70% of emissions come from cities, and that is from building, transportation, all the commercial and industrial companies within, and agriculture and stuff like that. In a similar fashion, you might underestimate how much behavior changes. A simple behavior from yourself within your home or talking to a friend can say, hey, you know what? What's the impact of that? What's my apartment or house really matter in this whole global issue? And the idea that the fact is it matters a lot, and the simple behaviors can matter a lot. If you're not in a position that can reduce emissions within like thousands of tons a year, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't take action and that your actions don't matter. So my call to action would be, and I had it written down, is stay informed, stay positive, and take action. Don't belittle any action because we need everything. And I think that's a little bit over 4 words, but
Well,
yeah, we can
Elio,
take it
that's
first
great. And
forward.
I'll ask you to put those in our word wall when it comes up in a minute. Andrew.
Sure.
Well, first to acknowledge and building upon Rita's points and the issue of ethics and also from Emmit, you know, we need an orderly transition. Okay, so being ethical would be to acknowledge that there is a transition and we're not going to get there overnight. And I think what we're seeing in the European Union and the UK this winter is an example of that. They're talking about a total breakdown of the energy system in those areas. And of course, there's brownouts in China as well, and they're going back to coal. So my call to action is, as a professional or as a practitioner within this field, whether it's you know, vehicles, transportation, buildings, industry, the call to action is threefold. It's to identify risk for your clients, your investors, your colleagues. It's to understand those risks. And finally, to make every effort possible to mitigate those risks. That's the call to action. And I'm just going to, you know, point out some of the stats in the chat. Oh, I've got to find another link. I'll put it in after, which is the risk of climate change impacts is very real. The Insurance Bureau of Canada every year publishes the statistics of insurance claims. And you'll see the chart. You know, the all-time high in Canada was the Fort McMurray wildfire year, and you know, 4-fold increase in insurance claims. Okay. So it's incumbent on all of us as professionals to identify those risks and to propose mitigation measures that we can invest in today to avoid those damage costs in the future. Thank you.
All right, Rita.
Okay, thank you. I would like to say that I know that change is difficult, but some changes are necessary. We should be stewards of the environment. And my call to action will be that we all have a role to play in addressing climate change. Some of us might say, oh, I'm just an individual, I'm not really impacting the environment. But if you take a look at your ecological footprint, and I will post that link in the chat, or Jill can help me do that, we'll see how we are contributing to the climate change, how we are negatively impacting our environment. And I'd also like to say that we need global cooperation. Everyone has to be part of this to avert an apocalyptic future. We all need to be part of this environmental movement. We need to take action now and address climate change. Thank you.
Emmit?
Okay, my point of view is that we should work on carbon capturing and storage. We should work on carbon capturing and utilization. We should capture carbon and try to recycle it for future use, maybe as biofuel. Now for the students, you should become part of the global warming community. You should become aware of your contribution, spread the awareness, bring your own shopping bag, use kitchen cloth instead of paper towels, avoid bottled waters. Last but not the least, climate change is not just about carbon dioxide level and melting polar ice caps. It is about our public health. It is about protecting our earth for future generations.
Excellent. Julia, do you have any Good.
Well, I just loved the comments on the curriculum and the assignments across all of WAU's and Toronto Film School's programs and courses. So I'm just going to ask the faculty on the call and Jill Cummings and her office to see what we can do to accelerate embedding that content so that all graduates of our programs are aware and committed to being part of the solution.
Well, I'll just add, thank you very much. And I'll just add, I just finished a book that came out. Some of you may know Catherine Hayhoe. She's a Canadian climate change scientist, devout Christian who now works at Texas Tech in Texas. Very strong advocate for climate change. The one thing she said above all else, and we've been doing it for the last 70 minutes, is to talk about climate change. Don't ignore it. Talk to people about it. Talk to friends, talk to family, talk to professors. We need to talk about this. If we, and again, like we've been doing today, I want to encourage you to make the talk as positive as possible. Now, Jill, we're running out of time here. Do we have time for people to go to, what we want to do is put together a word wall. So maybe, can we take 5 minutes, Jill, to do that?
Yes, I think we can. Let's all go to www.slido.com. And I'd like you to put up a word or words for your action that you will take to stop climate change. And the code that you need to get in there is 183121. So on your phones or your laptops, if you could Google slido.com and contribute, enter the code 183121, you can contribute to our word wall. Responsible consumption, teaching multi-ethics, SDG content projects. And I said, I will walk, and I will also commit to having faculty involved in developing more sustainability and literacy related to climate change. Start with faculty and then students. Risk mitigation, stay informed and positive, Earth Homes. Responsible consumption, teaching multi-ethics, talk. And we will try to send this out to you via the chat, and also we'll send out the recording.
Great. So I think while that's still coming in, Julie, do you want to wrap up with any, I saw you had a chat there. Do you want to say any last few words and then we'll wrap this up?
Yeah, so I was just seeing someone, I think Gerald posted in the chat that all of our BBA students take a course in business and sustainability. So I was so happy to learn that. I've only been in my role a couple months and I'm still on my listening and learning tour. So happy to learn more. Peter, I just wanted to thank you very much for inviting me and for reaching out, sharing with me what you're working on. It's just been just a tremendous joy. To get to spend an hour with such passionate and well-informed change makers. And, you know, we're all counting on all of you to continue your great advocacy work. But I did love the call to action so that everyone understands like we all have a role to play. So just thanks so much for a really engaging panel and appreciate you all contributing.
Well, thank you very much, Julia. Thank you, Jill, for organizing this. And Ali, Andrew, and Emmett, and Rita, thank you very much for your comments, your thoughts. I know you all put some thought into this, and it's a career you've dedicated yourselves to. And to the students out there, I hope that this has sparked interest in you in pursuing a career in energy management. There's 4 of us. Well, even Andrew's sort of still part of you. We'll call him part of Yorkville. You contact him as well. Please reach out to any of us if you're interested in a career, interested in a course, have questions about this, or thinking about a career. We'd love to help you. So thank you again for everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Great job, everyone.
All right.
Thank you. Peter, if I may
Thank
add,
you.
if someone can send the links that were in the chat, I think Andrew shared some good links and there were others that were shared. That'd be
So
great.
Jill, can you send those out as sort of a follow-up?
Yes, I'm going to ask
Yeah, That'd be great.
communications to
Very good
send
idea.
the video recording and the links, the chats, all of this information, and the word wall.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye.
All right, bye
Take care,
now.
everyone.
Thank you, guys.